Lightning cracked as the barn doors slammed open, wind howling through. A black stallion burst from the brush, eyes wild, hooves tearing across the ground straight for Clara. She froze. Then, a blur. Jonah leapt from his saddle, arms out, slamming into her just as the beast struck, throwing them into the hay. The horse came like a thunderbolt, wild, crazed, and aiming straight for her. Clara froze. But before death could reach her, Jonah, her silent, ragged husband, threw himself into its path. The barn erupted in chaos, and everything changed. Who was this man she'd married from a letter? And why would he give his life for someone he barely knew? This isn't a romance. It's survival, and the kind of love that grows in war's ashes. After her father died, Clara Whitmore stood alone on the cracked porch of the only home she'd ever known, staring out over acres of land that once thrived, but now lay thirsty and brittle beneath the Texas sun. No brothers would ride in from distant counties to help her. No uncles would arrive with seed or cattle or advice. She was 26, unmarried, and steward of the Red Hollow Ranch. Three facts that made most men in town either mock her or avoid her. The bank didn't care that the fences leaned. The rain hadn't come in weeks. The cattle were thin and listless, and the chickens had stopped laying. She bartered stew for nails and eggs for seed, and even the general store began to turn its head when she walked in. That's when Clara did what few ranchers in Texas dared admit. They needed someone, so she wrote a letter, not to anyone she knew, but to someone who might exist out there in the aftermath of a war that had scattered and broken more men than it had made. "I'm not promising a warm hearth or a gentle life," her letter read, "but I offer work, food, and a roof. The land is hard, but it's still here, and so am I." She didn't try to sound romantic. There were no sweet words, no coy handwriting, just straight lines and a steady hand. A woman asking for partnership, not poetry. Weeks passed with no reply, but far from Red Hollow, in a back pew of a weather-worn church in Arkansas, a man named Jonah Callahan unfolded that letter with fingers that bore the dirt and scars of survival. He didn't pray anymore, not after Cold Harbor, but something in those words stirred a memory of who he might have been, before the rifles, before the blood, before the silence. He didn't write her back. He didn't think he had the right. But he folded the letter and placed it in the one possession he never lost, a small canvas satchel that smelled of tobacco and pine resin. From there, her words traveled with him through logging camps in Missouri, cotton fields in Louisiana, and mule caravans in Oklahoma. He read them by firelight when the night was long. He mouthed the sentences when his hands ached from labor. In towns where men drank to forget, Jonah stayed silent and remembered. Clara's words weren't meant for comfort, but to Jonah they became an anchor. When spring broke in Texas again, the dust thick and the wind restless, Jonah finally stepped onto a train headed south. He had nothing but the satchel, a torn coat, and the letter that had never left his side. He had tried to forget war. He had failed. But maybe, just maybe, he could remember how to build something that didn't end in fire. By the time the train wheezed into Red Hollow, Jonah had read Clara's letter more than 24 times. Not to memorize it, but to believe it, that someone out there still valued effort over charm, that even a man like him, shattered, rootless, ragged, might be worth a second look. He hadn't come to be saved, he came to work. But part of him, the part that still dreamed despite everything, hoped she would see in him what he had dared to see in her, something not yet finished. And that was how a man with nothing in his hands but a name and a letter stepped into Clara Whitmore's life, without a promise, without a future, but with hope. The train hissed its final breath as it came to a halt at the dusty platform in Red Hollow. Clara stood stiff-backed in the unforgiving sun, her riding skirt catching gusts of wind laced with grit. Her heart thudded like a hammer behind her corset. For weeks, she'd tried to imagine what he might look like. Not handsome, no, but strong, quiet, maybe scarred, but upright. Someone who knew how to hold a fence post and take direction without flinching. She never imagined this. Jonah Callahan stepped off the train like a shadow of someone once whole. His coat was threadbare, sleeves fraying at the cuffs. His boots looked like they'd walked across 3 states and nearly gave out at each border. His beard was uneven, hair too long for decency, and his face, hollowed, sun-worn, eyes sunken but alert. Like a man who'd seen things he hadn't quite survived. He walked toward her with steady, unhurried steps. Not confident, just resigned. Like a man who didn't expect much and feared even less. "Clara Whitmore?" he asked, voice low, slightly hoarse. She blinked, jaw tight. "Good Lord, you're Jonah Callahan?" He nodded once. Behind her, she could already feel the townspeople slowing their pace. Heads turned. A man muttered near the water pump. "Looks like he crawled out of a grave." A woman's voice followed. "She wrote to that?" Clara flushed. Embarrassment first, then anger, and then fear. The kind that comes when something you've planned turns real, and that real thing isn't what you hoped. She opened her mouth, closed it again. Her gaze swept over him, from the satchel slung across one shoulder, to the cracked knuckles of his hands, to the stiff way he held himself, like each step required effort. His eyes didn't plead. They didn't even apologize. They simply watched. He stepped aside. "You got any other belongings?" she asked, voice clipped. Jonah shook his head. "Just this." She exhaled through her nose, tight, controlled. "Get in the wagon," she said. He obeyed without hesitation. The ride to the ranch was long and silent. The prairie stretched around them in dry gold waves. The mule's hooves clopped in slow rhythm, broken only by the occasional creak of the wagon and the wind brushing against brittle grass. Clara held the reins too tight. Every time she glanced sideways at Jonah, she saw the exhaustion in his shoulders, the long-healed scars on his hands, the silence in his expression. He looked like a man who had carried something heavy for too long and forgot how to put it down. What had she done? This man couldn't possibly hold up a ranch. He looked like he hadn't eaten a full meal in days. He hadn't smiled once, hadn't asked a single question, just sat still and alert, like a soldier between orders. Her mind raced. He's not strong enough. He's not ready. He looks half dead. But then, as if her father's voice had risen from the grave, she heard it, clear and steady in her memory. "A man's worth ain't what he wears, Clara. It's what he carries when no one's watching." She let out a slow breath. Then, before she even realized the words had left her mouth, she asked, "Why did you answer my letter?" Jonah didn't look at her, not at the sky, not even at the land around them, just forward. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Because you wrote like someone who didn't quit. And I wanted to remember how that felt." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was heavy, thick with unsaid things, and pain neither of them knew how to name. When the ranch came into view, it didn't look like salvation. It looked tired, worn. Fences sagged where the posts had rotted. The barn roof dipped on one side. The windmill creaked with every spin. A lone cottonwood tree marked her father's grave near the far fence. She stopped the wagon near the bunkhouse. "That's where you'll stay," she said, pointing. "Tools are inside. Pumps around back. We eat at sundown." He nodded once. She handed him the key. And in that moment, she made her choice. Not because he looked like a rancher or a husband or even someone she could trust, but because something inside her, some deep, stubborn part that had kept her going through every dry season and every sleepless night, recognized something in him. Something broken, but still beating. Maybe that was enough. She climbed down without another word, boots hitting dirt. He followed her lead, stepping off the wagon with care. And as the wind kicked dust around their ankles, Clara Whitmore did what she never expected. She gave a stranger the key to her land and the benefit of the doubt. Not out of foolishness, out of hope. Because what Jonah Callahan carried wasn't in a satchel or written on his face. It was in the way he never flinched when shamed, never begged when doubted, and in the quiet strength of a man who had survived hell and was still willing to work. And she was about to learn just how much he had survived. The wind outside was restless that night, rattling the shutters with the nervous energy of a storm that couldn't quite break. Inside the main house, Clara lay in bed, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. Sleep had been a stranger lately. Even with Jonah on the ranch, especially with Jonah on the ranch, her mind rarely rested. Who was this man who rose before dawn and worked until the sun died over the hills? Who fixed fences without being asked? Who kept to himself and didn't speak unless spoken to? Who never smiled but always nodded in quiet acknowledgement? And why? Why did she still feel like he was holding something back? Jonah Callahan had lived on her land for over a month now, and still he remained a mystery, a constant, silent presence, helpful, reliable, and yet a stranger. That night, as the wind whistled through the cottonwood branches near her father's grave, Clara got up. She wrapped herself in her shawl and stepped out barefoot, the chill of the wood floor giving her goosebumps as she crossed the porch. Lantern in hand, she made her way toward the bunkhouse. The door creaked as she pushed it open. Inside, Jonah slept on his side, his back to the room, one arm tucked beneath the thin pillow, the other hanging limply over the edge of the cot. The lamplight cast long shadows on the wooden walls. He didn't stir. At the foot of the cot sat his satchel. It was nothing much. Canvas, weathered, stained. But something about it had always struck Clara as important. Jonah carried it with him everywhere in the beginning, and even now it never left the bunkhouse. "Just one look," she whispered, her voice barely audible even to herself. "Just to understand." She moved slowly, quietly, as if afraid she might wake not only Jonah, but something sacred. Kneeling beside the cot, she unbuckled the flap and lifted the top. Inside, folded with care, were a few shirts, a battered canteen, and beneath them, bundled in oilcloth, papers, letters, her letters, all of them, every single one she had ever written. Clara's breath caught in her throat. She stared at them, hands trembling as she lifted the bundle. Some pages were wrinkled, others water-stained. A few had been torn and carefully mended with wax or thread. But they were all there, opened, read, treasured. She unfolded one of the first she had written when the loneliness was still new, sharp as a blade. "I do not know your name," she had written, "but if you served and have no place to return to, my land can give you work, and if you're kind, maybe company too." Amperin. On the back of the page, in unfamiliar handwriting, barely legible and scrawled in pencil, were words that hadn't been sent. "Your words are the first I've seen in weeks that weren't orders or death notices. I do not know if I am kind, but I have nothing else left to be." Clara brought a hand to her mouth. Her heart ached. Letter after letter revealed the same truth. He had written back, not to her, but for her, as if he had hoped someday she would read them. Words filled with doubt, hope, regret, longing. A silent man who had poured his soul into pages he never dared to send. Then near the bottom of the stack, she found the one that broke her. "If I don't make it through Cold Harbor, don't grieve. You already saved the only part of me worth keeping." Her vision blurred. She sat on the floor beside the cot, the letter trembling in her grip. The ink had run slightly from water, tears perhaps, or rain. It was dated June 1864, Cold Harbor. Suddenly everything clicked into place. Jonah hadn't been the intended recipient of that letter. It had been meant for someone else, his brother, Matthew Callahan. She'd heard of Cold Harbor. The battle was infamous. Men mowed down by the thousands in minutes. Brutal, merciless. And now she understood. Jonah had been there, and Matthew hadn't made it out. In the silence of that bunkhouse, Clara saw it all. The blood-soaked field, the screams, the final breath of a dying brother pressing a folded letter into Jonah's hands. "Find her," he must have said. Or maybe he didn't. Maybe Jonah only saw the name on the envelope, Clara Whitmore, and held on to it like a lifeline. Maybe he never intended to come. Maybe he couldn't stay away. She looked at Jonah again, sleeping so still he could have been carved from wood. His face softened in sleep, but the lines of grief were still there, etched deep. A man who hadn't just lost someone, he had carried the loss like a second skin. Clara folded the letters gently and placed them back, tears sliding down her cheeks unchecked. She rewrapped them, tucked the bundle exactly as she found it, and stood. Before leaving, she turned one last time. "You came in his place," she whispered, "but it's your burden now." And in that moment, she understood. Jonah hadn't come to take. He had come to give what little he had left. And somehow that was everything. Jonah worked the land like it was the only language he had left. He didn't smile. He didn't complain. From sunup to sundown, he mended fences, repaired hinges, shooed coyotes from the henhouse, and cleared debris from the storm-beaten well. His hands moved with quiet skill, measured, practiced, unshowy, like a man who had learned to survive by staying useful and unnoticed. The town noticed him anyway. At the mercantile, voices dropped to sneering whispers. "That the man Clara wrote for?" One clerk scoffed behind a barrel of beans. "Looks more like a ghost in boots than a ranch hand." Clara ignored them, chin high, shoulders squared. But gossip in Red Hollow traveled faster than prairie fire. The worst came from Silas Greeley. He was the kind of man who never forgot being turned down. Twice. Broad-shouldered, sharp-jawed, always with a hat too new and boots too polished. He'd courted Clara once with bouquets and the promise of easier days, and when she'd said no, he'd blame pride. Now he blamed Jonah. Rain or land used to mean something, Silas sneered one afternoon at the edge of the corral, arms folded as he watched Jonah drive nails into a gatepost. Now it's run by a girl and a ghost. Jonah heard. He just kept hammering, post by post, blow by blow, never flinched, never looked up. Later that day, the storm rolled in. Black clouds stacked along the horizon like a judgment. The wind howled first, then came the thunder, distant but building. Clara moved fast, her boots sloshing through thickening mud as she ushered the chickens into the coop and tied down the last of the tools. Lightning streaked across the sky like a whip crack from heaven. That's when she heard the panicked whinny. The new stallion, strong, wild, barely broken, had snapped his tether and gone into a frenzy. The wind had spooked him, his hooves tearing at the earth, eyes rolling white with fear. Clara barely had time to turn before he was charging through the pasture, straight for her. Time seemed to shatter. Her feet froze. The sound of pounding hooves drowned out the wind and rain. All she could see were those flashing hooves, that flaring nose, the force of 1,000 pounds of muscle aimed at her chest. Then, motion. A blur. Jonah. He leapt off the split-rail fence like a bullet from the dark. His body collided with hers just as the stallion barreled past. They tumbled into a pile of wet hay, mud splashing around them. A broken post slammed into the dirt inches from her skull. Her breath came in ragged gas. She realized she was lying across his chest, her hands clutching his shirt. You caught me," she whispered. Jonah's eyes were closed. Rain dripped from his hair, from his lashes, from the sharp line of his jaw. For a second, she thought he hadn't heard her. Then he nodded barely. Clara cupped his face. His skin was cold. "Why?" she asked, voice cracking through the storm. "Why would you do that?" He coughed, grimacing. "Because you wrote like someone worth saving." Tears blurred her vision, mixing with rain. She pressed her palm flat to his chest, over the heartbeat she had feared might have stopped. "You kept my words," she whispered, trembling. "Now I'll keep you." They lay there for a long moment, two souls soaked through, breath shallow, earth and sky crashing around them. But in the silence between thunderclaps, something shifted. Not pity, not debt, something real, something earned. The storm passed overnight, leaving the ranch damp and heavy with the scent of wet earth. The next morning, townsfolk whispered about what had happened. Some said Jonah had stared down lightning. Others said he'd saved Clara's life. A few still sneered. "Does that make him somebody?" Silas spat at the saloon steps. Jonah's answer came quietly, as always. "I think it makes me enough." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't boast. But that night, when Clara brought him a bowl of stew and sat across from him in the lamplight, he looked her in the eye as she said softly, "You didn't have to say anything." "I know," he replied, "but I meant every word." She didn't smile. Neither did he. But the silence between them had changed. No longer heavy, no longer guarded. It had become full. Full of something neither of them dared name just yet, but both of them could feel it, rooted deep beneath the dust and thunder. The morning light crept across the horizon in soft golds and pale blues, casting long, sleepy shadows across the front porch of the Whitmore ranch house. Clara stepped out with her shawl draped around her shoulders and a tin mug in hand, expecting the usual quiet, the usual scent of dew and distant horses. Instead, she found a folded scrap of paper resting on the porch rail. It wasn't sealed, no envelope, just a neat fold, handled carefully. She set her mug down, heart tightening as she opened it. Jonah's handwriting was rough, uneven in parts, as if unused to writing anything longer than a supply list or a name. But each word had weight, intention. Clara, you never knew it, but every time you wrote, you gave me a reason to wake up. I read your words with blood on my hands and smoke in my lungs. I didn't write back, not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't believe I deserved to. I thought if you met me, the silence would make more sense than the words ever could. By the third line, her breath caught. By the end, she was clutching the page against her chest as if it might slip away. She didn't pause to put on boots. The grass was damp beneath her feet as she crossed the yard barefoot, skirts brushing dew from the earth. Her eyes searched for him. She knew where he'd be. He always started with the calves in the eastern pen before the sun rose too high. There he was. Jonah knelt beside his shaky-legged calf, whispering softly to it, one hand stroking the creature's neck as he helped it stand. His back was to her. The morning breeze stirred his shirt, still damp from washing. Even now, after everything, he still moved with a kind of humble patience. Never rushing, never loud. Clara crouched beside him without a word. Jonah glanced up. She didn't speak at first, just laid her hand over his. The moment held. Then softly, almost as if afraid the words would break something, she said, "You came back." Jonah's throat bobbed. He nodded, eyes cast down. She leaned in closer, voice steady. "And now you're not going anywhere." Their hands stayed joined, rough over soft, worn over weathered, as the calf took its first wobbling steps beside them. The world was quiet in a different way now. Not empty, but peaceful. The kind of quiet that comes when two people finally stop running from the truth. And beneath the morning sun, with dirt on her knees and the echo of Jonah's words still warming her chest, Clara realized she hadn't just found help for her ranch. She had found the only man who ever read her words and chose to live by them. In a world that moves too fast and often celebrates the loudest voices, the story of Clara and Jonah reminds us of a quieter kind of strength, one rooted in patience, sacrifice, and the courage to show up even when you feel unworthy. Their love didn't come wrapped in romance. It was forged in hardship, shaped by grief, and sealed with quiet loyalty. And maybe in today's world, that's the kind of love we need to remember. The kind that doesn't ask for attention, just presence. It's easy now to scroll past people, to give up on second chances, to let silence win. But this story asks us, what if the person you're meant to trust doesn't arrive perfect, but arrives willing? Can love still take root in lives that feel broken? We'd love to hear your thoughts, whether you've lived a love like Clara and Jonah's, or still hope to. Do second chances still mean something today? Can quiet devotion still survive in a noisy world? Leave us a comment below. Your voice matters here. Thank you so much for spending time with the West that never left. If this story brought warmth to your day, please give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you won't miss the next tale from the frontier. Because sometimes the most enduring truths aren't lost to time. They simply wait quietly until we're ready to listen.